Welcome to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, on this brisk sort of fall-winter night in late October. So I recorded an episode the other day, and it was kind of a bizarre episode, and I got through editing it. Well, I was about, 3/4 through, and I thought, man, this is just screwed. And by the time I cut out all of the wind sound, which, I've recorded several episodes with a little bit of wind. This was a day when it was over 90 degrees here in SoCal. And it was amazing. I never can tell you how much wind it is. I can tell you almost to the degree how hot it is outside in Fahrenheit. But I can never tell you what the wind is. But it was bad. It's on video. I edited it all the way together, and I thought, you know what? I did all this work. It's not completely horrible. And I thought, well, I've got Patreon subscribers, and I don't really have anything special for you guys just yet. And so I went ahead and published it on the Patreon. So you can get a link to it if you want to go see it. It's called Moon Preparations. And my goal there was to really talk about all the platform technology that really never gets explained, but we're supposed to accept this stuff without any explanation. So, it's been 3 or 4 days. I put out 2 other episodes, and now I've got a name for this one. I believe what I'm going to call it is Moon Hoax, Unexplained Science. What that means is we will have all of these conversations, especially when I'm at my smoke lounge, in the rare case that we get into like a moon soup to nuts conversation, because all the regulars, we've already had the conversation 20,000 times. And so it's almost as if no one's interested in it, And so, but when a newcomer comes in and he or she's hot on it, boy, it's a blast to go through it. Now, for someone who believes the moon hoax, they're really the talker. And what I mean by that is someone who believes we win. They believe the hoax is true. It's kind of a weird way to say that. For those of us who think it was a hoax and we don't believe it, we don't try to go for the specifics all the time, because the entire story drops off really, really fast. Meaning, we look at the Van Allen belts and we're like, hey, that doesn't make any sense. But when you try to believe it, that's when things get a little funny. Because we realize right off the bat, they've kind of got us by the balls with science. The aerospace industry as it is. You could potentially say astrophysics. But the problem is that their technology is obviously shrouded for maybe national security reasons or some other bullshit. And again, everyone's going to the moon, man. So what's secret anymore? Miss Possum's over there. But now NASA says they're going back to the moon in 2024. One of the listeners said they heard it's 2028 now. All right. Again, I have no problem with that as long as we really go. Delay all you want. I totally support your delay. Be honest. We'll continue funding you and get there. But be transparent about what you figured out. Now, what's interesting about the whole thing is that let's take a different example when it comes to moon technology. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but it all starts out with platform technology. You have a platform that allows you to accomplish something. If you want to get from LA to New York and you want to fly, well, there's a platform called a jet. And the platform is built out of all kinds of sub-technologies. We know even third world countries understand the shape of a wing, how to create lift. What a third world country doesn't have access to, necessarily, is the original engineering schematics and the patents for Rolls-Royce engines, Boeing engines, Lockheed Martin engines, stealth engines, all this kind of stuff, right? So they know if they can get amount of thrust on the back of a plane to push at a certain speed, then the wing's going to do its trick. And of course, when you change the shape of the plane, you put a bunch of extra weight where it never was before. You want to move things around a little bit. Well, then you're getting into, aviation technology and engineering. And that's where the geniuses do what they do. So you could produce a plane and fully explain it to the public and simply keep things like the engines black boxes. But you're still explaining force, lift, whatever. With the moon missions, there's a very interesting thing going on because it's a bunch of catch-22s, it seems to me. Now, I don't think anyone would argue that the average education of a human being in 1969 and all the preceding decades prior, maybe starting around 1930 at least, but think about it. In terms of American schools, we still produced Edison. We still had people like Tesla walking around. We had all these geniuses in the books you could get a hold of. It wasn't quite as good as Barnes & Noble or going on the internet and buying a book. Where people understood engineering. Now, sadly, because some nerd understands HTML5 and CSS3, they look back on people in the 60s and go, look how stupid they were. I think per capita of synapses consumed for knowledge, way smarter in the 60s than now. However, regardless of how smart someone is, when you invent a whole new platform of technology, which is space travel, the whole lot of it all, right? Of course, there's platforms to put up satellites. There's platforms to put up satelloons, which are balloon satellites. There's rocketry. There's ballistic missile rocketry, which is never going to leave the atmosphere. And then there's slow orbital rockets that are supposedly, pushing astronauts in low orbit. And then, of course, the outrageous claim that they went to the moon and back, which is hilarious, right? And again, for the newcomers, let me just give you this analogy. For the old folks, be patient with me for 60 seconds. If you were to take the average 8-foot wall in a house, sorry, it's standard, but I'm actually going to give you a metric example. Now, I don't know if England does 8-foot walls, but we do. I did some math once, and when you divide an 8-foot wall with centimeters all the way down, you get about 237 centimeters approximately from the bottom of the floor to the top of the ceiling. And if we say each centimeter represents 1,000 miles, then we've kind of got this little example, this visual example of the floor is Earth's surface and the ceiling is stepping on the moon. Now, of course, we're negating orbital this and that. The nice thing about metric in this particular example is what is metric? It's a base 10 system. So a millimeter will divide into a centimeter 10 times. Well, the highest we had been prior to suggesting that I believe in Apollo 8, we went to the moon. 8 and 10 went to the moon and circled around and came back, okay, before we actually went there and supposedly got off and landed. We were only 200 miles up. In fact, it's most of the Wikipedia entries for those missions, which would be 9, 7, and below. It's barely 200 miles up, which is an extraordinary thing. If we truly did that, I think that's reasonable to believe. But that's only 2 millimeters off the ground with our little system. So when you want to think about how outrageous the claim is from NASA that they were able to travel to the moon, okay, which is outrageous to the power of outrageous. They were only 2 millimeters off the ground, and now they're going 8 feet to the ground, 237 centimeters up. Circling this thing, then landing on a moving object. Just think about all the issues. It is the difference between walking around in this backyard and saying you've got it all, you got the drop on travel, and then saying, okay, I'm going to meet you in New York, and then traveling over, 2 or 3 mountain ranges, going through all kinds of hostile deserts and snowy mountains and, all the predators and all this other stuff. That is almost the type of thing that they claimed, because we've got the Van Allen belts, which start around 1,000 miles up. They're 25,000 miles thick. As soon as you're outside of the Van Allen belts, which will kill you, you're in not the vacuum of space, but you're in the super radioactive area of space that has sun emissions going by. If there's a coronal mass ejection, the second you take off and it's coming at you, it could hit you and fry you even more. But then you have to catch this thing going around the Earth. Then you have to, separate the service module from the lunar module and do all this crazy stuff and then land, a maneuver that no one could have tested until the day they did it. Right. And they get out, there's no problem. There's just like problems all along the way. And you guys who've listened to all my episodes know this for a fact. But what do we deal with? But what do we deal with even if you're a believer? Well, let's go at some of the things that I have presented several times and other folks have. I just love the issue that once you get on the moon, okay, that's writing them like 50 blank checks to get there. Once we get to the moon, you have a temperature issue. Without talking about the oxygen issue. And again, I did look up that data. The average oxygen tank for a diver in deep sea, if you're a rookie, you can get a tank that lasts an hour. If you're a super skilled diver and you're not doing any heavy maneuvering, meaning trying to pick up treasure on the ground and you're breathing hard, you can get 2 hours out of a tank. And so you could wear 2 tanks on your back, maybe getting 3.5, 4 hours if you're a pro, 2 hours if you're a rookie. These guys are on the moon for like 17 hours. It's unbelievable. But as soon as they get off, of course, NASA's claims are that you have a 500-degree swing in temperature, 280 plus in the sunlight, which is just 40 degrees off from lighting a match in Fahrenheit, and 280 degrees below zero in a shadow. So you're walking from light to shadow, and you're getting cooked and baked and frozen and all this other stuff. Now, if we present that to NASA as believing children and go, tell us how you did that, what kind of answer do we get? Well, children, they had spacesuits on. Really? Yeah, and those spacesuits protected them against hot and cold. Okay. You have any other questions? We have unexplained science everywhere. How'd you have enough power to keep the lunar module powered up? How'd you have enough oxygen in the back of that stupid-looking backpack on the back of the spacesuit to not only have power to move the air to the tip of my toes, to the top of my head, to the extremities of my fingers, but also have a tank of oxygen somewhere? You can't scrub it out of anything, right? It's 1969 too, folks. But when you ask them to fully explain what they claim is true, this is where everything falls apart instantaneously. It is the most unequivocal Achilles heel of anyone claiming that we went to the moon, because all of their answers are pseudo-answers, pseudo-knowledge. It's sort of a denial black box, right? What's the theory of a black box? Hey, it does what it does, and you don't have to know anything about it. Okay. And hey, if it actually did it, we would see. For most human beings on planet Earth, everything's a black box, because they don't know anything about electronics. And, you shouldn't have to know. You look at your computer, you're a grandmother who's 80 years old, and you're looking at this computer. You have no clue, depending on your background. A lot of ladies involved with the initial computers of this world, so I'm not trying to slight and pick on a woman. But let's just say it's this wonderful grandmother like mine. They have no idea what a hard drive is, what memory is. Jeez. What do you call this thing again? That's a mouse, Grandma. Okay, that's cute. when we went from CRT monitors to flat screens, 4 or 5 different species of flat screens, you think the average consumer knows what's going on? Nah. If a guy's a electronics guy, sure, he's going to know the difference between OLEDs and LEDs and LCDs. And this is where we could go at this. Now that we know this, right? You know this to be true. It's like a big aha moment. Oh my God, yeah. Even when things are explained to me, when they're not truly explained to me, such that I can understand the true science of it all, I just accept it. And part of that is just a necessity of survival, right? You don't want to have everything explained to you. However, we are trying to uncover one of the greatest mysteries / lies to humanity / Hollywood hoaxes perpetrated by the government on the American people, with billions and billions of dollars laundered through this space program. And because they won't come clean with what they were actually doing, which is probably just missile systems for the military, because they weren't going to be able to get Americans to support such a thing directly, which is a little weird if they actually did make that decision, because we did just have the Cuban Missile Crisis, and all they needed to say was, we are in a Cold War, the nuclear threat is real, and even if you wanted to deliver conventional warheads that weren't nuclear, you got to get them there. And we're going to have to develop this technology, and it's going to cost $50 billion in 1970s money. And I think most people would probably go for it. Maybe not an overwhelming majority, but enough to get it passed. Not that we get a chance to vote on shit in this world. So what's the best way to apply this theory? I think I have an answer. Platform technologies. If we were to break down the moon mission, especially in 1969 to 72, but also for this new claim that they're going to go to the moon and do, a whole new mission. And, again, if you read the website, it is like reading Walt Disney's Wet Dream from 1955 when he was trying to create Tomorrowland and give everyone the mission to Mars and all that stuff. If it came from Walt Disney, you would be excited that he has thought through this whole thing and he's building an amusement park that is going to simulate what NASA claims they're going to do in 2024 / potentially 28 / some other day. Again, as long as they were honest, man, I would so get behind some form of a NASA. I think Space Force should take on everything military. And if SpaceX launches something for Space Force, that should be transparent to the public. Again, we don't potentially need to know how everything works, but if they say, oh, you put a spy satellite up there, they used to say that in the 80s with the space shuttle. There's a spy satellite. You can't say it's one of those things. But if we were to take the moon missions again, Apollo 11, let's just say that. What are the platforms? Well, they're all over the place, to be honest. But at its most crude form, you have sort of a Russian doll situation. You have, as an external, most prominent platform, the Saturn V. Within the Saturn V, in its first little shell, you're going to have a service module, which just has a little triangle capsule in it, which is where our astronauts are going to ride out this launch. But inside there's actually a lunar module as well. The thing with the 4 legs that's going to actually land on the moon's surface. So you kind of have 2 sub-platforms inside. Service module, lunar module. Once they get in orbit around the moon using the service module and its little thruster engine, the astronauts are going to go through the nose cone, go into the lunar module, and then they're going to step off. And two of them are going to go down, one of them's going to stay back. They're going to do this crazy maneuver down to the moon, which has never been done before. It was done absolutely perfectly. But so you now have 2 platforms going at the same time. Now, Michael Collins is in the service module without the necessity of wearing his spacesuit because he's got full-blown oxygen forever and ever, plus power. I mean, it's the most amazing platform ever made with 1969 technology. Again, if Tesla could get a hold of the battery technology in Apollo 11, we'd have a 1,000,000-year battery today, because we are so much more advanced than 1969. It's ridiculous. You had, and I just give you 3 milestones, right? First milestone is the rope memory computer that was inside, supposedly, and they, you have examples of it online. I never heard of this crap, but I'm sure people did. And there's videos of them making the thing. It's the most extraordinary, crazy invention I've ever seen. I mean, hats off to them for this thing ever working. So that's the first milestone. Then you have, by 1980, you've got something called the Cray Computer. Now, the Cray Computer is several million times faster than the 1969 processor. Okay? Well, because I'm involved with film and I know folks in special effects, I get to see presentations all the time by my buddies who worked on these legendary films, and they did a little thing back during the iPhone 4. And they said, they did 2 things. How long would it take to render the entire movie Tron, 1982, that took like 4 or 5 different computers to do it? But they compared its processing power to the Cray Computer of 1982. And it's 8082, same model. I believe the estimate, which has changed a little bit, but it's like 4 million times faster than the Cray. They could render the entire movie on an iPhone, I believe, in 26 minutes or something like that. Maybe less, I'm not sure. Okay. Where are we in 2019? We're several orders of magnitude over an iPhone 4, and if you really talk about government computers that would be put in some ultimate apex of processing technology, I am sure that we are 10 to 50 million times faster than an iPhone when you talk about covert systems that would go inside a space vehicle where we want the best of the best, right? What's the other platform? Well, it's the spacesuit. The spacesuit itself is a platform. How do you keep astronauts alive on the surface of the moon? Spacesuit. Now, at that point, you're pretty good. You just play it all in reverse when you want to get back to Earth. Except you have another platform, which is the mechanism by which these astronauts are going to re-enter the atmosphere, kick out 3 big giant parachutes the size of your house, which have those little tiny parachutes pulling them open, which if you, again, research the parachutes, it seems impossible that would ever be possible because they were compressed to the density of bark. And you think these little guys, these little parachutes are going to pull them up. Go ahead. Let's take any scientist who says that can be done. Let's take his backpack parachute and let's compress it down to the size of like a kitchen sponge. And we'll give you a little white parachute. And I'll just push you out of that plane. I'm going to have a normal parachute on. I'm just going to push you out of the plane, and we're going to watch this little tiny parachute pull this bark density parachute out before you hit the ground. It ain't going to happen. Again, that's another touch point in the Achilles heel of this whole thing. They tell us things, we believe them, and they get away scot-free. You ever see those old movies where it's either the 1800s or before, or 1900s and before, and there's no technology, there's no, let's say you go 1800s or before, and then you're talking about, there's no, let's just say the telegram hasn't been invented yet, and so as long as you can get on a horse and ride from town to town, you could claim that you're a different person at every single town, and no one would know the better. They have to believe you. There's no national ID. There's nothing, man. You got to have some money on you to pay for your thing, or you're going to have to work immediately when you get there, earn some money from the locals, and then start spending it in the community. Well, that's sort of what NASA's been able to do. You don't know. You have to take my paraphrased, easy to understand explanations, which, again, it makes sense depending on what audience we're talking to here. If we're talking to little kids, of course. But we should encourage the children, in my opinion, to ask those detailed questions. Well, okay, it's like the little kid that always goes, why? Why? We need to be the little kids that keep going, how? Explain it to me. Now, you might have an equation in front of you that's a big calculus equation, and it's using all the Greek symbols and what have you. And so it's obfuscated from someone without a mathematics degree, or at least some sort of some early adoption of mathematics, okay? But if we were to tell them, look, your job is to prove to me that me, a citizen of the country that's going to give you tax money that I could be spending on cigars, if you want to convince me to give up my cigars so that you can have your space program as your job, here's what I want you to do. No more Greek algorithms, equations, excuse me. I want you to break it down into computer code. Put it in JavaScript, something everyone understands, maybe Swift, right? But put it in something that we can immediately test it. And for those of you who aren't programmers, there are tons of websites out there with JavaScript sandboxes. There's all kinds of different languages. But there's a website, you just bring it up, and it's got panes cut into your web browser. And you can type an algorithm on one side, fill up the values, x equals 2, y equals 1, and you can say, output x plus 1. And you say run, you hit the little run button, and on the other window it says 3. Pow, we got it. If you need to loop to create an algorithm of some sort, we're going to create like a wave of numbers. They got that too. It's all there. And you can, if you're really good, you can download Mathematica and watch this stuff roar. So take each one of those platforms and start dissecting them, because each platform has its subcomponents. Like I said, if a plane was considered a platform to fly from Los Angeles to New York, well, without even being a genius, there's the wing. There's the wing design. There's all those little fins and stuff out there to make sure it goes up and down the right way. Then you have your engine, and your engine has all kinds of throttles on it and techniques. You have those little fins that can be on the backside of the engine. You could have a 2-engine configuration, 4-engine configuration, single-engine configuration. Based on how many people you've got in this plane, that's a different weight. Well, what are all the variables? If you jumped inside the turbine engine, well, okay, how does kerosene get on these fins and turn into thrust? There was that funny conspiracy that jet engines work just on air. The real truth of the matter is that turbines are one of the most efficient engines ever invented, especially when you start ramming air through them. I believe the ratio is 20% of the engine energy and thrust is generated by igniting fuel on the outer fins, on the inner fins, and then I guess it's the outer, and then the air jamming through it actually provides 80% of the thrust. It's a beautiful configuration. It's one of the most fuel-efficient ways to travel. It's a lot different on the surface of the Earth, so when you create these jet engine funny cars or those jet engine, salt flat speed cars, I'm not sure how much of that ratio maintains itself. But Saturn V has a particular fuel mix. There's all kinds of genius behind the fuel mixes, and that's legit. The first Rocketeers, they had to figure out how do you store liquid fuel inside of a vertical container, because it splashes around. And so as the the center of gravity starts to change, because you're actually consuming the fuel and the tank is becoming empty. For any of you who have used to drive, hot rods, and you hit it really hard and you got one wheel on the right that's a traction-based axle, and the other one's going to follow the one on the right, and you throw your rear end around, and you're like, how the hell did that happen? I accelerated, and my rear end came around. On a microscopic level, when you have a bunch of boosters underneath a rocket, or even a single one. It's probably even worse with the single one. Maybe not. It's still bad. They had to create all kinds of technology. Those little nozzles now, they kind of swivel a little bit to make sure that it stays upright. And it's all real time. Oops, I'm tipping. Microscopic little thing happens, and then poof, it's back on track. It's phenomenal, and it's mega difficult. Now, obviously, the education system in this world is atrocious, and America is probably currently close to whatever bottom of the first world country list that there is. And yet we still generate geniuses. It's weird. So it's as if the knowledge is always present for American children, but you have to have, I guess, a decent gene pool. You have to be, luck of the draw that you got a dense neural net to be able to go, this isn't enough, I want more. And then boom, they become hackers. And it's all over the place. Chinese, Russians, Indians, all the Europeans, including, I always think Australia too, so don't worry. So there's geniuses everywhere. Other areas, not so much. So what platform technologies do we really want to know about? Because we could nitpick things to death, and I think we should. I mean, the most ideal methodology was that, again, if we had our Deep Thoughts University and we had several thousand members, here's the cool thing about this exercise. You wouldn't have to be massively technical to get involved with this program, this exercise, this test for agencies that claim outrageous accomplishments. And why is that? Because the very goal of this inquiry is to say, okay, dudes, you say you can put this Saturn V 200 miles above the surface of the Earth, locked into orbit around a ball that is several, I think it's my calculation, I think it was 2.6 billion times bigger than the object that's left over in the end. So, the Saturn V goes up, and all these stages come off and they fall back to Earth. I think we can trust the footage we've seen where the rings are coming off and the camera is shooting out the bottom. I don't have any problem believing that big giant monstrosity could accomplish that. Now, I think some of you probably even question that. And hey, you would be on the mission to go to NASA, and perhaps your slice of the inquiry is to say, okay, you have F1 boosters of which you've never published the specs on, even though Wikipedia has a bunch of Rocketdyne engine thrust tables. But we need to know, how much does this thing weigh, which is all above ground technology. Above ground facts that you can find out. So you take it all and you write down as much as you possibly can. You're like, look, how does this thing work? How do you fight the atmosphere? How do you get this thing to turn perfectly? We see it do it a little bit. And multi-stage rockets, existed way before 1969. I used to be, again, one of those amateur rocket builders where, you build a little rocket and you get the A, B, C, D engines. No problem. I've seen that stuff work on lesser situations. You can go out to those festivals and watch it happen all the time. So we have to totally believe that that's capable. Just because it gets bigger, it does get harder, but it's not unbelievable. But I'd like to know a lot more about how to lock something in orbit. They've obviously, they had to have thrown something up there and it didn't work, right? And then keep throwing a little higher and a little higher and a little higher until Sputnik can happen. I think because we live on Earth and because we can generally find out the amount of pull that the Earth creates, regardless if you're a phenomenon bullshit gravity person or a fully explained ether model of gravity, you still can do the calculation. Okay, great. So you should be able to calculate how to throw something away from a ball that's going to get sucked back to the ball. And, it's trying to fall back to the ball, and so it goes into this orbit, right? But now here's where we need for them, especially with Apollo 11. You could actually technically go 8 and 10. You're in orbit around this ball. If you take the service module and you attach it to the lunar module, Earth is 2.6 billion times bigger than that object. Okay, you spent all your fuel, Your big fuel getting into that little orbit, 200 miles up, as all the previous missions stated. Okay. Now you need to introduce more energy, sustained, to create this elliptical slingshot thing. And again, for me, it becomes the moon landing killer when you really think about this thing in 200-mile orbit, and then all of a sudden it's going to start introducing enough force to escape the gravity of this ball that is 2.6 billion times bigger than this thing. You have to escape. But you're going to have to keep so much fuel and so much pressure on this little vehicle that you're going to have to create a larger orbit, and you're going to come really close to the Earth, and a larger orbit, and you're going to have to miss the Earth. Again, this whole diameter of this orbit is going to have to continually increase and increase. Otherwise, you would do what you do with the rubber band. You look at the rubber band and it's perfectly circular, but if you start stretching both ends, what happens? The center collapses. And if there's a big ball inside of that first shape, and you start introducing power to create a larger, elliptical orbit, you're going to crash into Earth. So you have to constantly put more and more hands inside this rubber band to keep the thing, continually creating this elliptical orbit. And again, I have done so many moon episodes, it's crazy. I have went up and, searched on thousands of photos to help narrate what I'm talking about. There's 60s NASA animations, of which I can't put in the videos because they'll get copyright striked. One of them was somebody in the last 20 years did a beautiful animation that looked like a 50s animation, but it was created recently. I threw that on one of my videos and got nailed. Too bad BitChute didn't exist at the time. I left everything in and given it to BitChute. But I never saw a claim from NASA of this increasing elliptical orbit. All you ever see from the 1960s documentation is this thing going around the Earth, and all of a sudden it just escapes. No problem. Okay. Well, if you have enough power to just walk away from the Earth in literally a tangent line to the curve that you're on, why ever orbit the Earth at all? Just fly straight to the moon. You have so much power. So that platform technology has never made sense to me. And I know what some of you are saying, not much of the core listeners, but if you're new, you might go, hey man, well, we got rovers on Mars, we got satellites going out to Titan, we got things going around Venus and Jupiter and Pluto and all this crap. No, we don't. And that's why we got to prove the moon mission can actually occur, which it can't in 1969, so that you will understand and be able to instantly swallow the truth that everything you've ever seen on Mars is either in some studio somewhere, it's some, patch of Greenland you've never seen, or it's in a computer. Just that simple. Out of sight, out of mind. All you're buying as a citizen of the world to feel good about yourself, if these programs make you feel high and mighty, and you can be an employee of one of these companies that says they're doing it, and you're still lost. You're just, again, you're allowing black boxes to go in your mind, science unexplained, or someone gives you a fragment of the algorithm and you're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. No, it doesn't. Make them completely prove it in some engineering software that doesn't know anything about JPL or NASA. It's just engineering software. The one area that is the next thing, let's just say again, I think we got them dead to rights with the slingshot theory, but let's just say, somehow they can fudge all the math, or hey, in some miracle situation, the math works out, and we could supposedly figure this thing out. And again, you have to believe that a rocket engine works in space. And I know what people think. You're thinking, well, there's a cone out there, and you create an explosion inside the cone, and there's relative push from the fuel against the cone, and of course you're going to travel in space-time. Let me back that up, and let's do a little experiment. you're floating in the center of the galaxy. You're not necessarily close to anything, so you're not going to get sucked into a star or sucked into a planet or a moon. You don't see anything close by. Looks just like stars. All right, so you see a star you want to go to. I guess what you have to do is rotate yourself somehow in space, right? But let's just say you could kind of thrust your body and you could turn yourself, right? Then I guess the only thing you have to do to get there is just push on your chest. Just push on your chest. That's all you got to do. It's relative force from your hand to your chest, and now you're going towards that star. Anybody want to make a bet if that works or not? Just because it's a different shaped chest, and just because it's a explosion of fuel, and not your hand, physics doesn't care. Hard surface, force, relative force, boom. I don't think it's going to work. But we'll give it to them. Again, things can go into low orbit because you have thick atmosphere. As much as you might think it's too thin for us to breathe and all that kind of stuff, they are pushing off of the Earth first, then they're just literally swimming through this thick soup that we call our atmosphere. And relatively speaking, even if you lose that friction, you'll still have a trajectory. And if there's nothing there to push back at you, you're going to keep going. It's good. But we do have gravity at all times. Ethereal winds, as I go on about. If you're new to the channel, definitely check out my episodes on ether and gravity. Go to the website, deepthoughtsradio.com, and just search on those keywords, and you'll be all set up. But now we have this Van Allen belt thing. Talked about it a million times, right? Well, what if we were to say science unexplained? Okay, let's have two schools of thought here. Let's not go to JPL NASA to have someone explain to us the Van Allen belts. Let's go to a cosmologist and say, look, the sun is throwing these gigantic coronal mass ejections at us. Supposedly, there's a lot of debris. We see, meteor showers all the time. One of the funny conspiracies about that is, what if the timed meteor showers, which we shouldn't actually be able to predict, because who the hell knows what's in space, right, at any one particular time, it's just UFOs landing. It's UFOs coming in, and so they just tell us, let's go watch that. And then, of course, the Pentagon's going, here they come again. Okay. So they tell us, look, because we have a magnetic core, we're going to disagree about what that is. They're going to say nickel iron if they're not electrical universe. If they're electrical universe cosmologists, which is the cutting edge cosmology that exists today, they'll tell you that's an electrical core. It's just a big plasma ball, and it's probably empty. Tesla, again, proved it in Colorado Springs. All right, great. So they will tell you how much energy is coming out of this gigantic ball. And it's fighting off everything. It fights off everything before it gets here, right? It fights off all the radiation from the sun. That's very powerful. I mean, it's not quite as powerful as throwing a bowling ball at your head and having it bounce off this, this force field. But you could probably throw a BB at it and it'd bounce off unless it went tangent right to the curve, right? I mean, perpendicular to the surface, right? Okay. So we get all this radioactive radiation principles from one group, and then we take it over to NASA and we say, okay, 1/4 inch aluminum of which has never been in any list of metals that would protect us from radiation. It has never been used in history that I know of to protect a human being from radiation. And of course, the rest of it, fabric and all kinds of other stuff, that's nothing. The only steels that really work would be something extremely heavy, lead. Maybe if you could make it out of uranium, right? Insulating it with water. 6 inches of water was what the guy from NASA told me in 91. But that doesn't protect you against the Van Allen belts. That just protects you against ambient radiation from the sun without a coronal mass ejection hitting you. The funny thing is, when I was told that in 91, I didn't have any precedence in my brain for a problem that needed to be solved. But this guy was talking all about it. Amazing. So you get the registry of the theorized amount of radiation, which supposedly Project Orion flew once, figured out what it was, and then immediately marked the data classified. First time in history that the natural universe has been classified. It's classified because it's absolutely, positively mega lethal. They can't have you knowing that, because then everything that they have been lying to us about falls apart. And when that falls apart, the organization falls apart. If we go for criminal justice, well, a bunch of people get arrested for lying and perpetuating lies. That'd be a big, giant prison, wouldn't it? That's the NASA prison over there. That's JPL prison over there. And that's the subcontractor prisons over there. Amazing. There's no way in hell that the 1969 capsule of the service module could have protected these astronauts from radiation. All the film that they brought up, they went through the Van Allen belt supposedly, would have been exposed. There wouldn't have been any pictures on the moon. Michael Collins' camera with, Buzz Aldrin twisting a tuna can, that never would have come back home. Because it might work at 200 miles up. Maybe. Probably. But it wouldn't work once it went through the Van Allen belts. It'd all be overexposed. Madame Curie, she figured out radiation existed in uranium bars because film was getting developed through its light-sensitive, light prevention envelope, because she put a bar on top of it, went home, came back, used the film later, and boom, there's a bar spot on all of the pictures. Because just the radiation off a piece of uranium, which is nothing. Okay, a piece of uranium has what's called metal shielding. It automatically has less radiation than when it's pulverized into an aerosol, like a 14-inch A10 depleted uranium round. That stuff's mega lethal. Still, we're talking about a fraction of a percent of a fraction compared to the Van Allen belts. Plus, there's some laws of physics which say that, was it the third rule of thermodynamics talks about how, hot is attracted to cold. And so even though the atmosphere is very sparse and the particles are very far away from each other, you slam some vehicle going 35,000 miles an hour or so through this environment, you're going to have all of these supercharged particles that are at, they're saying they're 4,800 degrees Fahrenheit, or maybe it's even Celsius. It's some insane amount of energy and heat. It might liquefy the vehicle if you go too quickly through it. So some people don't believe everything they say about satellites. But again, we go to the next situation that the platform has to endure, which is ambient radiation from the sun. All right, we should figure that out. That's probably one of the most unreported pieces of science out there. But the guy in front of me, I had two guys in front of me in 91, for those of you who've never seen an episode, debriefed me about the fact that they were on the Mars project. One of them looked deeply for the Saturn V Apollo platform. I think he said something around 3 months. Someone pulled him aside and said, "We never went. Stop searching. We're not going to Mars in your lifetime. Take your paycheck and shut up. You will invent things, so you're not going to be completely useless." He stayed for several years. He ended up quitting a year before the guy next to him. These were buddies, and he got his buddy a job at where I worked. And he looks to his buddy and says, "What was the last thing they said to you? Or that you found out, or whatever?" And he talked about the 6 inches of water necessary around a capsule to insulate against just ambient radiation from the sun. I mean, think about it. What is happening on Earth during the day? Well, the sun warms us. We all know that. But if you think about all the different processes that have to take place for that to become a reality, it's mind-blowing. Again, I'm saying this with a little bit of skepticism in my own mind. Somehow the moon completely perfectly stays facing us through thousands and thousands of years. It never ever rotates. That seems a little odd. Supposedly NASA says the moon's actually drifting away. That's completely against the laws of physics. It's too big for our planet, so that's really weird. I got a whole episode on the moon. You should go check it out if you want to think about the moon being something different than what they say. But this sun is supposed to be 93 million miles away during the eclipse. Supposedly, during the eclipse, 100%, the moon blocks the sun. It's unbelievable. How's that so perfectly aligned? Maybe we are in a matrix for all I know. But this sun, according to their, official science, is barfing out all of these agitated waves of energy, which we call photons. And it's traveling a really long distance, still staying very vibrant. And so its friction is going to create the heat, right? But it's got to punch through the Van Allen belts first. Photons are pretty badass when it talks about an electron cloud stopping a photon. It doesn't really work that well. But here it comes through. Now it hits us. First it hits all of our liquid air. We have a very thick oxygen layer, even though it's not that thick relative to the size of the Earth. And then it hits us. Boom. We get some little, the pituitary gland? We get a little bit of vitamin D. We stay healthy. It's awesome. All right. So, of course, if you're just out there floating in the soup that is the ethereal winds of the universe, and you're hit by this gigantic ball in space, especially if you want to go official science, you don't have any other theory for the shape of the Earth, you don't believe in expanding Earth, you're just totally an official science person. That's the platform called a helicopter. But if you're official science, then you have to acknowledge the power of the sun, and you just being right there in front of it. Okay. Now, I will say that the next part of our platform technology, we have some pretty reliable science. Okay. It is, any of you have downloaded an astronomy app on your phone, and you turn your GPS on, and you turn all your gyroscopes on, which are already on anyway, but you hold it up, especially the iPad one, which is really cool, and you just, you point it at the stars, and it's not exactly perfect, it's a little sluggish, but overall, if you're like, what's that bright star I'm looking at, and you hold it up, oh, it's Venus, it's a planet, oh my God, it's Mars, it's Jupiter. Okay. Where the moon is going to be in any one particular time, I think is fairly easy mathematics. I really do. So, in terms of plugging in where Cape Canaveral is, how fast an object is moving, and then again, if you can make up these other issues of the slingshot and then getting through this big radiation belt at the same exact time, and you have to remember, while you're doing the slingshot theory, you're being chewed up by the Van Allen belt. So you're not just going to punch straight through this 25,000 mile thick thing. You're going through it, and you're coming out of it, and you're going through it, and you're coming out of it. I mean, it's going to be eating you alive before you ever get there. It was really funny. I just saw a video on YouTube at my lounge the other day, and it said, 10 of the most remote places in the world. If you go watch those videos, it's an eye-opener when you think about radiation. There is, I believe, the tallest, but they said that it's so high that the radiation that these employees are exposed to is monitored. And then they named 4 or 5 other places that are way higher, and it was always the amount of radiation. One of these places is only open a few months out of the year because the radiation is so high. And you're still on the surface of the Earth, for God's sake. Okay. But now you got to catch up with the moon, and you've got to not hit it. You've got to get close to it. Now, again, if they could actually prove they could do this slingshot thing, and, they could get close to the moon, but you have to understand, if there's any anomaly in the engine where it might burp a little bit, if there's any anomaly in the atmosphere during this whole process, it's thicker, it's lighter, it's thicker, it's lighter, air pocket, no pocket, dense pocket, whatever, then you're going to have a lot of adjusting to do at these microscopic levels. And when you're traveling 270,000 miles away on average, we're talking about a lot of adjustments. And we're not going straight. So it's millions of miles is what they're traveling, because they're going around the Earth, around the Earth, around the Earth. Then they go way, way out there to the moon. I don't know. It should be close to 1 million or something by the time they get there. It's definitely more than 237. Okay. So now they're going to get sucked into the gravity of the moon. Now, they have told us a long time ago that the moon has 1/6 the gravity as Earth. All right. Does that make sense? Well, again, if a core of a round object in space displaces X amount of ether, then you're going to get X amount of gravity, period. The only thing that would change that is if somehow the moon, in all of its glory, is not as opaque as the Earth when it comes to particles going through it. If it's a little bit permeable, a little bit more ether goes through it than you think, then you're going to have less gravity than you think. But because it does orbit the Earth and it has a particular diameter we can measure, just don't use a sextant, because then the world turns flat. And the sun's not that far away. I always thought that was amazing. Let's say we could give him a little mulligan on the gravity of the moon. Because if they had any of that wrong, then all of their trajectories, all of their mathematics would collapse. If it wasn't as heavy as they thought it was, or had as much gravity, I should say, they're probably going to overshoot it and just be floating in space. I mean, talk about being screwed. If it's heavier than they think, they're going to crash into it. So they absolutely positively have to have something that works. And the weird thing was, the first time they ever went out there, which I think was Apollo 8, it worked the first time. So their calculations were absolutely immaculate the first time. But would you really do that? Would you really send a human being the first time if all this whole thing is just a hodgepodge of mathematics run by a rote memory computer? Why not send the first thing out there without a human being? Just see if you can slingshot it around. Because what in your life have you done for the very first time that has that level of complexity and variables that might go wrong, where you nailed it the first time without being completely serendipitous? I doubt anything. And there's this theory that as long as you have enough brains thinking about something, you will never have any issues, right? You're just going to think about it enough and it's going to work. Maybe. Best intentions, right? Now, what's also interesting about the moon mission at this point, when they're going into essentially low orbit around the moon, is that you don't see any, at least I've never seen it, and I've never heard it theorized. Perhaps this has been a blind spot to all my particular research and listening to people talk about it. You never really hear about any major maneuvers once they got there. There wasn't like, oh shit, we're going way too fast towards this, surface. Hit the booster and move it around. No, it's perfect. And Michael Collins up there, who stayed up there the whole time. Maybe they get into orbit and it's a countdown situation, right? Even if it happened in real life, we'd have to get we're here now. Get over there into the lunar module. I'm going to shut the door. And then we're going to do this separation, and then you're going to go down to the moon. I mean, you can't be messing around because you have limited of everything. Limited fuel, limited oxygen, limited food, etc., etc. But all this radiation that they're worried about in observatories and high altitude locations where people just hang out. Okay, well, it's way worse out there. We just know that for a fact. And at this point, the second they get past these super lethal, I don't know how many million times more lethal the Van Allen belts would be than ambient radiation from the sun, but it's got to be several orders of magnitude over. Again, they magically survived the microwave. Now they're out there completely unshielded for the entire journey. The only thing that could probably reduce a little bit of the radiation for Michael Collins would be as he's orbiting the moon, when he gets on the backside of the moon from the sun, he's got moon protection. That'd be about it. In my model of ethereal winds, he is still being crucified by radiation. But maybe it's more photon waves and ultraviolet and X-rays and things coming off the sun that is the most lethal species, and maybe ether moves through them with no problem, just like it's doing to me right now. Okay. We don't have the math written down as to how all this works flawlessly. And for me, if you can achieve that much complexity your very first try, my God, what are we doing here burning oil, burning natural gas? What are we doing with computers that I still have a completion bar? Well, the reason why those difficulties still exist, at least in part, is because we're not as advanced as NASA would like you to think that we are. And I want to stop for a second and draw a comparison to war. Where else do we see unadulterated technology? The best technology. We see it in war videos. We hear about it from our friends who come back from Desert Storm and tell us they wore basically a stealth suit. And the stealth suit has actually evolved over time. The initial stealth suits they wore in Desert Storm were hiding any of their body heat signatures. But if you saw them, you would see them. Now I believe we actually have 100% stealth technology, and there's an amazing video out there that's never been claimed to be a hoax, where this tank is going down an alley, broad daylight, and here comes this human figure running, which obviously that character, if he exists and if that's real, has no equipment on his body whatsoever. He just has the stealth suit on. But he runs up to the tank. The tank has a lid that pops up. This character jumps in, and the tank stops. Full-on Predator technology. Okay, so let's say we have that now. Still nowhere close to the amount of variables and perfection that the moon landing would have required. Even Apollo 8, which just circled the moon and came back. Now, what is the difference in magnitude between simply orbiting the moon and coming back, and actually going to the moon and pulling off this extra maneuver and going down to the moon, landing safely, getting out, messing around, and coming back up? As hard as putting a service module around the moon might be, I think the lunar module story is, I've been abusing the phrase, but I think it is an order of magnitude over the service module, which means exponential. It is several times more difficult to do the lunar module thing. And again, what have we ever done in history that we succeeded on something so difficult the very first time? As Bart Sibrel said, and as I've said in the episode, he noted the fact that even though we had airplanes from at least 1907, we really had them in 1904, or 1903 actually, or something like that. Yeah, 3. But we had airplanes completely figured out. We had fought several wars with them, from the biplanes of the Red Baron to, propeller planes twice, World War I, World War II. You have jets that debut in Korea, Vietnam, commercial airlines. This stuff was figured out before we tried to make the 747. I believe Bart Sibrel's number is over 160 attempts to get the 747 to fly the very first time. So try it, it doesn't work. Redesign it. Try it again. That happened over 160 times for the 747, and I believe he said it took like 16 years or something like that. When you talk about platform technology, this is a perfect example. The platform of flight with jet propulsion technology was already figured out with several other models. But the latest one, because we didn't have computer simulation like the 787, which flies the very first time, as I understand it, we didn't have that technology. But they go to the moon and back with 1969 technology. Oh, we've never been able to recreate it since 1972. For 50 years now, we've never been able to do it again. Give me a break. So the lunar module platform, relies on a bunch of assumptions. It relies on the assumption that One, you can even fit inside that vehicle what you need to survive for, I forgot what it was, by Apollo 17. Apollo 17 took 12 days and 13 hours to complete, which means every single breath taken by 3 men was compensated by what's inside the vehicle. Their food, their water. 12 days and 13 hours. Okay. Apollo 11, they were out for 8 days. Okay. Sure, whatever. What do you want? Well, let's make it 50 days. Why don't we? So here comes this rickety thing that, again, once you look at the photographs of it, it's really embarrassing. The outer container wasn't sealed properly, right? You've got all this weird flat black, wrinkled panels, but then to make it look really space age, they got this copper, stuff all over the legs. And again, I can't go into all the stuff that is absolutely ludicrous, that is the evidence. Go see my other episodes. But it breaks off, and of course, rockets work in space. It's just doing these little tiny, retro engines to rotate it around, then poof, it pushes down. And it's hauling ass. It really is. You see the footage out the window. They are moving. And suddenly, with really virtually no explanation at all besides rockets work in space without an atmosphere, this thing again is blowing against nothing, and it's slowing down. Would have been interesting for the astronauts to kind of jump up in the air and push on each other. Wouldn't that have been cool? They probably would have fallen, broken their neck, even if it was real. But this thing lands. It lands hard. And again, there's no skid marks on the little footprints. There's no dust on the footprints, even though you saw metric tons of dust move out from under this 10,000-pound thrust engine. Man, none of it got on the vehicle. Unbelievable. But every time you see the astronauts jumping around, they're covered in soot with just one jump. The lunar module, although much bigger than you might think it is, the Rocketdyne engines that they invented at that time always have a gigantic, I don't know what they call it, but it's the fuel injection system, right? It's a system that routes the fuel down through the cone. If you take the average size of one of the engines above the cone, it's way up inside the living cabin of where these astronauts are supposed to be. The doors aren't big enough to let the astronauts out. It's like a completely failed platform just before you actually introduce the elements of the moon. And one side of it's going to be really super mega hot. The other side's going to be super mega cold. You have these spacesuits on. They're inflated. You're going to go out in ultra radiation, right? Again, just go watch all those episodes on YouTube about radiation and high altitude observatories. Well, if these astronauts can walk around on the moon with a super volatile radiation plus a massive amount of heat and cold, there's no reason why those observatories can't be open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Because, hey, all they got to do is wear a little bit of plastic and rubber and clothing, and they can just be up there forever. In fact, according to NASA, all they have to do is build a living quarters down below with 1/4-inch aluminum containers, and those astronomers can be just fine. As a matter of fact, they just need to build planes out of a 1/4-inch aluminum, which I think some of them are, right? And then, the little, I forgot what they call it, but it's a little lapel pin that all flight personnel have to wear, from flight attendants to pilots. They have to wear this little clip, and jet pilots and military pilots, they all have to wear this little clip. And the clip compresses between 2 sandwiches of steel, a piece of film, straight up film, Kodak, right? And then they take those things off and they develop the film, and they realize how much radiation exposure you've had, and they keep a little tab in a database. And once you reach your maximum exposure, you can't fly anymore. Done deal. It's a whole lot. Okay, you can still have a pilot with 20,000 hours plus, but there is a limit. Well, according to these videos about, observatories, I don't know. There are mountains that are so high that, they're like 15,000 feet is one of them. That's roughly 3 miles up. But, a flight only for a citizen usually lasts, anywhere between 1 hour and maybe if you're an international flyer, 14 hours tops. And I do want to just throw out there a slight digression, because if you are a member of the Facebook page for Deep Thoughts Radio, just go to the website. There's a link up there. I hear this thing all the time that, the Flat Earth community says that we don't fly over the Pacific. This is why you don't fly over the Pacific. Okay. I went to Australia last year in August. I took off out of LAX and I flew directly to Sydney, right over the ocean. I think at one point we could see Hawaii. So we did fly directly over the Pacific Ocean and directly at Australia. And according to the Flat Earth model, my trip would have been, 36 hours or some crazy thing, and it's not possible. So you may want to drop that particular one, because I got there in, I don't know, it's like 10 hours, 11 hours, something like that. It was Virgin Australia. So when you say I can't find a ticket that flies, we'll just go Virgin. It's the only Virgin I think that he remains after he sold the whole thing off. It's a great airline, by the way. My God. But the lunar module has more requirements than all the other platforms. Even the spacesuit, which has a lot of responsibility, doesn't have as much as the lunar module does. Because what's the lunar module have to do? It has to separate from the service module. It has to turn around. It has to go down. It has to survive and align with the ground. Again, if there was one rock in the way, this thing would have tipped over. And if it ever tips over, no two human beings at 1/6 gravity are ever going to be able to ratchet that thing back up, and you got 2 dead astronauts eventually. And just imagine the story of that whole thing if that were to occur. It hits a little rock on one of its 4 feet, and it tips over. Because you don't know. You don't know. You can't see the moon's surface at that level of detail. You can't. Not even with reconnaissance satellites from 8 and 10, you can't see it that detailed. So, the guy in the service module would have to go, adios, I love you, brothers, see you later, and he goes back to Earth, and those guys die. Hardcore, right? Thank God it was in a Hollywood basement, okay? But it has to land, they get out, now they're just in the spacesuit platform, but the lunar module still has to support their life as they go in and out. And then you have this amazing, if it wasn't difficult enough to land on the moon, and I don't know, technically speaking, which would be more difficult, landing on the moon or this one crazy crapshoot that worked 6 out of 6 times. It's like insane. It's insane to assert that this is possible, right? I'll give you an analogy that's YouTube-based. I bet nearly every single one of you have seen at one point in the last 15, 20 years these amazing videos that these kids create that are actually compilations of 1 in a million situations where they'll be sitting down at a chair and they just throw something behind them and it falls in the trash can. Or, they have super elaborate ones where they throw a CD across the room and it falls into a CD player and somehow it closes and plays the CD. Just amazing, crazy things. Throwing dishes and they happen to land in the dishwasher perfectly. Obviously, they're breaking tons of glasses. They're missing the trash can 50 to 100 times before they get it all right. Of course, the more complex the problem, the more they have to try. The ones where the guys throw the basketball like 1,000,000 miles and then it hits swooshes. That is nothing compared to what the lunar module platform claims to be able to do, which is you have some explosive charges that go off underneath this thing and it just blasts this thing straight up into space. You've seen the footage that they submitted as real. So this thing is going straight up into the atmosphere. It doesn't have any orbital properties about it at all. But the service module's going in an orbit, okay? And technically speaking, its orbit is the same speed that it came off of the Earth's orbit at, what would have slowed it down? Right? They don't have any booster going the other way. As far as I know, I've never heard, and correct me if you've heard different, they would have to turn around, hit the booster, slow itself down, turn around, then be ready for this thing. But this thing is so perfectly timed out that by the time it gets into space, there's a service module, and supposedly they're going the same speed. But bolts, or explosives underneath are going to shoot it straight up, perpendicular to the surface of the moon. It's not going to go in any type of orbit. But that maneuver, that rendezvous, is an orbital rendezvous. You see it in their footage, man. Here comes this top half of the lunar module, and the moon is moving underneath. How did it get orbital movement? It's not what you see. Now you might say, oh, it's got little retro rockets. Those little things look like mixers at the bar, right? There's a little Lego that has that on there too, right? By the way, I just saw that amazing documentary on Netflix. I think it's called The Toys That Made Us. And you go look at the Lego one, and it's just an amazing story about the Lego franchise, which I guess means play well. Lego. And they cut the words off and mixed them together. But this thing rendezvous at this, I don't know. There's probably a few of you listening that are really good at statistics and probability. I went through it. I went through it and on my own and didn't, really have any application for it when I finally was working with the guys when we were architecting EA.com. We were trying to figure out what the statistics and probability of functionality was for 20 million consecutive users. That was the first time I ever used it in my life and the last time I ever used it. So anyway, but if those of you could figure out all the variables and then put odds against, I think it would be a very sobering moment for anyone who believes that we landed on the moon. But again, we just swallow this stuff. It's unexplained science. And what if I present that and then someone just goes, well, it just sped up. It just sped up in space as it's going up. And again, what would be the full path of that lunar module top capsule area if the surface module never picked it up? Well, it's blasting straight up in the air, and it would go way up there, but then it would come back down and crash. So as this thing's going up, it's also got this fuzzy logic crescendo of speed. You see it in their footage. It comes up, and it slows down perfectly and attaches perfectly. Hey, guys, come on over, and then throw it away. Which I never ever heard them claim this, but we're not supposed to be, one of our prime directives in NASA is we're not supposed to be, polluting the surface of any foreign planet before we get there, or moon or whatever. But these things would have gone back down and crashed somewhere on the moon's surface. And that should be somewhere in some reconnaissance picture. It's a big giant piece of steel, and it should have a little, unlike all the fake craters on the moon, which are actually volcanic explosions, you'd have that Superman trail, right? It would hit the ground, and then whatever. Why would it have a Superman trail? Because magically, without any explanation that I've ever heard, it achieved orbital speed, so it could rendezvous with the service module. If you think about the scan that we were willing to buy because we wanted to believe in it, 1969 and up, it's no wonder we have like snake oil guys and scammers everywhere, and why it still works. Hi, I'm the IRS. I need you to give me $20,000 in iTunes gift cards. Oh, that sounds legit. Sure, boom. I don't know why I got scammed. Because the IRS doesn't take iTunes gift cards. How about that? How about they don't even call you? And, just as a digression on that one, because it does apply to the moon mission thing. I've had friends of mine get scammed by that gift card thing. They caught themselves in the middle of doing it, or gave me a call, I think, and I said, no, don't do that. Oh, okay. And then it just vanishes, right? No one comes to at their door to take them at gunpoint to go pay the IRS at some bank. Never happens. But it happened again to the same person. And the same person was right in the middle of falling for it when I came over to visit one day. And he's like, oh man, this person, but it was a different scam. It was IRS the first time, I think. And then it was, I've secured your computer. And you won't be able to get anything off unless you give me your money. And I'm like, well, is your computer working? Yep. Is it a Mac? Yep. And we just didn't do it. And everything was fine. But it's amazing. Well, I would say too, as you get older, this is kind of scary. Your frontal lobe is very important to your ability to discern reality. Your toxicity in your body is very important when you want your brain to work correctly. If those things ever get damaged or polluted, or both, all this stuff might start making sense when you get older. Well, yeah, we did go to the moon. Why not? I need a good feeling today. And again, I think I did an episode about, why we have to believe in the moon mission, or the people that do. And I'm very cavalier on this show. I'm very, let it all hang out when I'm talking about this, and I insult anyone who believes in certain things, but I don't really mean it for everyone. I believe that the audience that watches this show already believes it, so I'm not offending anyone. But for those who need to believe, there's a lot of things going on in their mind. And quite frankly, just as your child may need to believe in Santa Claus when they're young, because maybe they're living in a tormented world that you're unaware of because you're not paying attention to them, or you're the dick being a dick to them. Not you personally, but those people, bad parents. Maybe the Santa Claus, well, I would say this. Fred Rogers, who's Mr. Rogers, he absolutely positively proved this with people coming up to him 20 years after he started his show, weeping in line as adults and saying, if you watch that documentary on him on HBO, it is worth the subscription to HBO, or just rent it. But this woman came up to him and was so excited to meet him in line. Of course, he's a sweetheart, so he's meeting her, and she starts kind of sobbing through the conversation because she said, my home life sucked. And when you said that I was special, that made me who I was today. You gave me a beacon and a reason that didn't have any qualifications. You gave me unconditional love, but a reason to believe in myself, that I was special, that I hadn't found out exactly what was going to make me special, but you told me that I just needed to find it. Don't sit on your butt, but you just have to find it. And so we don't know everyone's issues in life. For them, maybe everything else has gone wrong in their entire life. I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's probably a few out there. And the moon mission, and their knowledge of the moon mission, as it was portrayed to them, is their one calling card. It's the one thing that makes them special, not only inside, but it makes them special to everyone who's Google-eyed about how many facts they remembered that NASA told them was true. So do we need to, confront a person like that and say, oh my God, you're so lost, you're so blah, blah, blah. Nah, we don't. Let them believe. Let them totally buy it. But you young folks that are going to be running the world in 5 to 10 years, you don't want a country built out of false patriotism. If you allow your country to tell you lies to make you feel comfortable with your country, probably not a good idea. But let's compare it to something else that may be more real, but it's also bad news. So we know the Native Americans used to exist here in plenty. They owned North America. Period. No interpretation. It was their land. Here comes Europe. They're trying to escape tyranny, which is just, it's such an acidic reason to be here. It's sort of like how I think Americans feel when people from South America allow their countries to go to shit, and then they want to migrate up and infect America, benefit from all of the folks that fought for the Constitution. But you're worried that, okay, you have no backbone to fight your own country, fight for your own land. But you want to be in my world and infect the strong bone structure we have, which is supported by the Constitution. I don't trust you. I don't trust you to defend my Constitution because you won't defend your own country. Yeah, you should die trying. And you find out you won't even have to die. Just stand up. But you're going to have to go in a group, right? But we came over here because we screwed up Europe. You know, the old phrase Indian giver was about us. It wasn't about them. They loaned us a bunch of stuff because we didn't bring what we needed. And then when they were like, okay, we just loaned it to you, we didn't give it to you, they wanted their stuff back. And then we started calling them Indian givers. Isn't that great? But we are responsible for the wholesale slaughter and near genocide of the Native Americans. It's not a bright spot in the history of America. Now, there's just only, I don't know what the percentage is. I think it's below 50% by a large margin of actual people who are related to anyone who ever did that. But we still benefit from the spoils of those events occurring. And as much as they tell you it was smallpox and influenza, that's just a cover story. We slaughtered. It was horrible. So there are situations that we can't take back. But the moon mission is something we could take back if it was fake. We can at least set that correct. Don't you want to say, look, if someone confronts me personally with, the Native Americans, with slavery, I have methods of answering that. I personally would never engage in something like that. Again, I didn't do anything the first time, but I wouldn't do that. We have evolved way past that whole thing at a huge expense to other people. Slavery, as I say all the time, you have to remember the people that brought them over went back to Europe. The average American did not have money to buy a slave. Only European plantation owners did, otherwise known as Democrats. And then, of course, you have Yankees that would have slaves to pull them out of poverty. And that's where you get the pictures of them wearing suits and dresses. And yes, they were not free. But as I understand it, by the way, General Lee, who was a Confederate, was also not keen on slavery. But the moon is its own special thing. It's a modern day thing. We should know better than to believe it. We should know better than to support it. Do I blame anybody back in the day for believing it? Hell no. Hell no. Maybe a super brilliant scientist, but that's why there's so many of you who comment in the comment section. Someone recently, within the last 6 months, said, my grandmother never believed we went to the moon. And I would love to meet that lady. I'm sure she's long gone, but geez, wow, what an incredible woman to look at that and go, yeah, bullshit. But the only reason that we are allowed to believe this is because we have unexplained science inside black boxes. I'm not smart enough to know that, and so, okay, it must be real. And watch me take my, finger off here, right? Pull a coin out of your ear. And so, we've talked about this a lot. I've got about 5 minutes left on this stick, so I want to kind of finish off with this further study of the intellectual obligations that we have today. There's this question, which is the following. Can we just allow them to have it and then figure out how to go? One, I think that we are, okay, think about it this way. Think about how many movies we have today and television shows. I should actually have said television shows instead of movies, where the level of gore and reality and even beyond reality, beyond gore, fake gore, which is, how do you get worse than a real life murder scene? Well, fake one that's even worse. And that's so much of the television we have today. So for someone to tell me we can't handle aliens from outer space being acknowledged, us going to the moon, you can't get a flat earther to say that the earth being flat is something we couldn't handle. They're ready. Are we ready to find out Jesus never existed? I don't know. I think the answer is it's a non-issue at this point. Can we, do we have to wait for every single person who was alive when it occurred to die? People who believe it, I should say, to die before we can talk about it? I don't know. When any of you, because I'm one of you, if you believe it's a hoax, how excited would you be to wake up tomorrow and the headline is NASA admits they never went to the moon? It's just right there. Are you going to have a negative feedback, right? When truth goes through your soul, which is what you're made out of, right? Again, I always want you to remember, we don't think of it like this, but it is absolutely crucial that you remember this. The universe is pure truth, and we are a part of the universe. If it weren't truthful, okay, we would cease to exist every once in a while. Things would just erupt. The universe would rip apart, and Earth would get sucked in and destroyed. I would be morphing constantly because my mathematics aren't true. They're not perfect, but they're perfect. And that's why when you feel the truth, say the truth, think the truth, and hang out with people who are honest, it's a beautiful world. My family, I don't talk about this much just because it's never come up, but one side of my family was all about keeping up appearances and hiding truths. If somebody, I don't know, there's some of this you don't want to hear and some of it you do in terms of when you're at dinner or something. But the other side of my family, my surname family, if someone got an enema that day, because they were sick or whatever, it could come out at the dinner table. I know it's totally inappropriate and weird, but we're just talking about life. If someone was a jerk or someone was this and that, you could say it to their face. And what you have to do on your end of the game is go, yeah, I'm sorry. That's all you got to do. Keep it real, man, right? So I think if that headline ever hit a newspaper / website or whatever, there would be this overwhelming joy in the world that a big chunk of proof was revealed. A big bunch of truth proof would be revealed, right? How many of you don't believe Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy, but you're sick and tired of hearing that he did? Wouldn't you like to know who else took those shots? You don't even really care exactly who they were, but there's 25 guys all over the place. J. Edgar Hoover participated with LBJ and whatever. They have all these sci-fi movies that have like the grand reset. And it's typically some sort of cataclysmic event that resets all of time. I think Blade Runner 2049 talked about the reset of history. So they wouldn't technically have to be in the time that they were in, 2049. Okay. What about just a reset of truth? How amazing would that little movement be? And that's sort of what the awakening is all about. But the very first step, and we're taking prudent steps towards this, is to get rid of deep state organizations, their loyal followers, get rid of Agenda 21, and get us back to the point we're living in normal, sovereign, inalienable right world. And then we get to these other things like the moon mission, Kennedy's assassination, Franz Ferdinand being bumped off, kicking off World War I. Who made Adolf Hitler? I've talked about the moon thing a billion times. I'm surprised that there are so many of you that want me to continue talking about it because it is a fixed moment in time. It has a fixed number of variables that lend themselves to the story. And so I keep analyzing it, and I will say it's funny being in my shoes, having this desire to do the moon missions. I really do. I love doing them. But I also cringe when I watch internet videos from really popular, well-designed websites. The amount of repetition that goes on with the hosts is starting to get to be a little alarming to me. They will say the same thing 4 or 5 times before they move on to the next point. And they don't change the perspective as they talk about the same thing, right? You know, look at it from the right side, look at it from the left side. It's still red. It's still red. It's still red. They're saying the same linear, one-dimensional thing, or I guess two-dimensional thing. I don't get it. It's like there's some virus out there in the world, some neurological disorder that is called repetition. And when I was a kid, the only people that repeated themselves were old people. Why do you think every time I mention something that I've already mentioned before, I want you to know that I know that I've already covered that? I almost think, I've debated even saying it, but I just feel this moral obligation to let you know I'm not going nuts. I'm bringing it up for new audience members because they never heard it before or whatever. But what I am finding out is that there always is another perspective. And this platform technology perspective is huge, because whatever they're going to do for this next hoax to the moon is going to mandate a ton of platforms. And I think that when we sit there as fanboys interviewing Elon Musk at his big Starship thing, we are not asking any really detailed question. We're asking Elon Musk to make up another black box. Hey man, tell us something else about something that could happen while we're not able to confirm any of what you're about to say. Please give us more of that. And he's just looking at him like, okay, you know, he's like Peter Sellers in Being There, you know, except he's actually really smart. But he just looks at him and you could see on his face, you know, and his stuttering and his weird presentation manner is just so bizarre. I think stuttering is a matter of nerves. It's a matter of telling lies. You know, Obama, every single time he tries to go off script and every time he tries to tell a bold lie without his teleprompters, he starts stuttering. He's got a really weird stutter problem. But there's a condition. If you look up every video of Barack Obama stuttering, someone has got him off script. And he is trying to improvise, but he knows he has controllers. He knows he'll get in trouble if he goes too far. And he's, because his brain's like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What lies have I told that I can remember right away? And he gets nervous and he basically short circuits like Robbie the Robot, right? But I'm seeing young people repeat themselves. My God. I'm just thinking, what is it? Diet Coke? You know, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Anyway, as to not repeat myself again, I think that's all I've got for this particular episode. I do want to apologize. I just posted 7 new podcasts to the website, and it's just because I'm working on a new film, and I'm working with a team this time, and it's an amazing experience, so I am not remembering to put those up there. So anyway, I got it all caught up. As of this recording, the last episode I put up was Agenda 21. So if you ever care about kind of where and when this was recorded, I want to let you know I found 3 episodes that I recorded a long time ago and didn't realize that I hadn't pushed them out. I think I lost faith in them. And one was on forgiveness. One is on, I don't know exactly what I said. It's called Old America. And there was one other one I can't remember at the moment because I just dragged them all over. So I'm going to evaluate those. If they're good, I'm going to throw them in season 5, but I might look a little younger. I'll actually slap on the date. So when you see those 3 come through the pipe, it's just a little thing from a time capsule. But it's 3 a.m., so I better get to bed. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything you need's up there. 2 video, YouTube, and BitChute. Again, BitChute is taking off. If you guys don't have the BitChute app on your phone, or you don't go to it, you don't have an account, get it, because you're going to be able to find a lot of stuff that the deep state won't let you see, including all my videos, uncensored. It's great. We have 2 podcast technologies you can use. It's all RSS feed stuff. Remember, go to the device you want to listen to the podcast on, go to the website, hit the podcast link, boom, you're hooked up. 2 social media, Twitter, which I don't do much with, and Facebook, which is an amazing community. It's locked. Make sure when you apply, you say something human. It could be anything. I would say don't spend a lot of time writing too much because I don't think we read it that much. Just let us know you're there. There's 2 ways to donate with cash, and that is PayPal, which some folks from BitChute I think are starting to use. I apologize, I don't know who you are, otherwise I'd put you in the credits. I don't know why PayPal keeps you completely anonymous, but hey, I'm cool with that. And then there's Patreon, where you create a little account. You can put $1 in every month. And what that will get you is the episodes before they release in 85-90% of the case. Plus, now I'm going to start putting some exclusive stuff up there. There's 2 other affiliated things. The Brave browser, which you need to get on, change the search engine from Google to DuckDuckGo. By the way, it finds all my episodes, whereas Google does not, because Google and YouTube work together to shadow ban. So if you want to have the best search results in the planet, go there. And Backblaze, which gives you 30-day retro on your files for $5, and then for $7 it does a whole year. This is something they recently changed, and I forgot to update you guys on that. $7, 2 computers, infinite drives. Go get it. It's awesome. And then, of course, the all remastered Season 1. This channel does not have Season 1. It's a different channel, because I didn't want to interlace old videos with brand new videos, because it was 100 new videos. It would have really messed up this channel badly. But they've all been remastered, audio levels balanced. It's really great, and BitChute has them all as well. But just go up to the website. There's a search field. There's a category list. You can find the videos you want. I am now saying, if you think you're subscribed, please make sure you are subscribed, because everyone's getting unsubscribed. Of course, click the bell if you want those notifications. And always remember, it's a variety show. So some videos you're going to like, some videos you won't. If you come here for Moon stuff and you've never been here before, there are so many Moon episodes, it'll take you probably a week to get through them if you listen to them in a binging format. But that's what the category list is for on the website. Until next time, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.